Sarah Martinez never imagined that a simple vacation would turn her entire life upside down. The 28-year-old graphic designer from Phoenix, Arizona, had saved for 2 years to afford this trip to London. She wanted to see the famous landmarks, taste authentic fish and chips, and experience the culture she had only read about in books and seen in movies. The morning started like any other tourist day. Sarah woke up early in her small hotel room near King's Cross Station. She could barely contain her excitement as she got dressed, pulling on her comfortable walking shoes and grabbing her backpack. Today was the day she would finally see Buckingham Palace, and she had her camera ready to capture every moment. The London streets were already bustling with people when Sarah stepped outside. Double-decker buses rumbled past and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from nearby cafes. She stopped at a small shop to buy a bottle of water and a sandwich for later. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with kind eyes, wished her a lovely day and told her to enjoy the palace. Sarah took the underground to Green Park Station, her heart racing with anticipation. As she emerged from the station, she could see crowds of tourists already gathering near the palace gates. The golden gates gleamed in the morning sunlight, and the magnificent building stood proudly behind them. Sarah had seen countless pictures, but nothing compared to seeing it in person. She walked along the path, taking photos from different angles. Other tourists chattered excitedly in various languages, and children ran around playing while their parents tried to keep them close. Street vendors sold Union Jack flags and miniature palace replicas. The atmosphere was festive and electric. What Sarah didn't know was that she was carrying something unusual in her backpack. 3 weeks earlier, her brother Marcus had visited her apartment in Phoenix. Marcus worked as a security guard at a shopping mall, and he was always concerned about Sarah's safety, especially since she lived alone and often walked home late from work. During that visit, Marcus had slipped a personal safety taser into the side pocket of her backpack without telling her. He meant well, wanting his younger sister to have protection during her travels. The small device was legal in Arizona, and Marcus assumed Sarah would find it eventually and appreciate his thoughtfulness. He had no idea that tasers were strictly prohibited in the United Kingdom, classified as firearms under British law. Sarah continued exploring the palace grounds, completely unaware of what sat hidden in her bag. She joined a group of tourists who were positioning themselves for the best view of the changing of the guard ceremony. The iconic ritual was about to begin, and excitement rippled through the crowd. The guards emerged in their distinctive red tunics and tall bearskin hats. They marched with perfect precision, their movements synchronized like clockwork. Sarah raised her camera, wanting to capture this quintessentially British moment. The tourists around her pressed closer, everyone jostling for the perfect view. That's when things started going wrong. In the crowd, Sarah felt someone bump against her from behind. She stumbled forward, trying to regain her balance. Her backpack swung around and she reached to adjust it. As she did, her hand brushed against the side pocket. She felt something unfamiliar and hard. Curious, Sarah unzipped the pocket while still watching the guards. Her fingers closed around a small grip-shaped object. She pulled it out slightly to see what it was. Confused because she didn't remember packing anything like this. The device was black and yellow, compact but heavy for its size. At that exact moment, another tourist pushed past her roughly, causing Sarah to lose her grip. The taser slipped from her hand and tumbled through the air. Time seemed to slow down as Sarah watched in horror. The device bounced once on the pavement, then skidded directly toward one of the royal guards standing at attention. The guard, a tall man named Officer James Whitmore, had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 5 years. He took his duty seriously and had trained extensively to remain perfectly still during his shifts, no matter what distractions occurred around him. But what happened next was beyond anything his training had prepared him for. The taser, having landed on its side, somehow activated upon impact. Whether it was the fall or an unfortunate combination of buttons being pressed, electricity suddenly discharged from the device. The electrodes made contact with Officer Whitmore's ankle, just above his polished boot. The effect was instantaneous. Officer Whitmore's body went rigid as the electric current surged through him. His eyes widened in shock and pain. Despite his rigorous training, his leg buckled, and he stumbled sideways. His tall bearskin hat tilted dangerously, and he grabbed at the nearby gate to steady himself. The crowd gasped collectively. Tourists pulled out their phones, some recording, others simply staring in disbelief. Sarah stood frozen, her hand still extended as if she could somehow reach out and undo what had just happened. Her mind raced, trying to process the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. Within seconds, other guards broke formation. 2 officers rushed to Whitmore's aid while 3 others moved swiftly toward Sarah. Their faces were stern and professional, showing no emotion as they approached. Behind them, palace security personnel were already running from their posts. Sarah's legs felt like jelly. She wanted to explain, to tell them this was all a terrible accident, that she didn't even know the taser was in her bag, but the words stuck in her throat. All she could manage was a whispered, "I'm so sorry," that barely anyone could hear over the commotion. One of the guards, a stocky man with sharp blue eyes, reached Sarah first. His voice was firm but controlled as he said words that would echo in Sarah's mind for years to come. "Miss, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not move. Do not touch anything else in your bag." More security personnel arrived. The crowd of tourists began backing away, creating a wide circle around Sarah. Some looked sympathetic, others angry or frightened. A woman shielded her child's eyes. Someone in the crowd shouted that Sarah was dangerous. Sarah's hands trembled as she raised them slowly, showing she meant no harm. Tears began streaming down her face as the full weight of what had happened crashed over her. She had assaulted a member of the Royal Guard in London. In front of hundreds of witnesses and probably dozens of cameras, Officer Whitmore was being helped to a nearby bench. Paramedics were already on their way. The ceremony had stopped completely, and Sarah stood at the center of it all, her dream vacation transforming into her worst nightmare, knowing that her life would never be the same again. The next 15 minutes felt like hours to Sarah. More security personnel surrounded her, their radios crackling with urgent communications. She could hear snippets of conversation about securing the area, checking for additional threats and alerting higher authorities. The words made her stomach turn. They thought she might be dangerous, maybe even a terrorist. A senior security officer arrived, a woman in her 40s with gray streaks in her pulled-back hair. She introduced herself as Commander Patricia Reynolds. Her voice was professional but not unkind as she began asking Sarah questions. Where was she from? Why was she at the palace? Was she alone? Did she understand what had just happened? Sarah tried to answer through her tears, explaining about her vacation, about not knowing the taser was in her bag. But even to her own ears, the story sounded far-fetched and suspicious. Commander Reynolds listened carefully, taking notes, her expression giving nothing away. 2 other officers began carefully searching Sarah's backpack, documenting everything they found. Behind them, paramedics were examining Officer Whitmore. He was conscious and talking, which Sarah took as a small relief. But she could see the red mark on his ankle where the taser had made contact. The sight made her feel sick with guilt. This man had done nothing wrong. He was simply doing his job, and she had hurt him. The crowd continued to grow despite security trying to move people along. Tourists held up phones, recording everything. Sarah knew that within hours, maybe minutes, this incident would be all over social media. Her face would be everywhere. Her parents would see it. Her friends would see it. Her employer would see it. The thought was almost as terrifying as what was happening right now. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached. 3 Metropolitan police cars pulled up near the palace gates, their blue lights flashing. 6 officers emerged, and Commander Reynolds briefed them quickly. Sarah watched as one officer spoke into his radio, probably calling for even more backup. A tall police officer with kind eyes approached Sarah. He introduced himself as Sergeant David Clark. Unlike the security personnel, he seemed more focused on understanding what happened than treating her like a criminal. He asked if she would voluntarily accompany them to the station to give a statement. Sarah nodded immediately. She wanted to cooperate, to show them this was all a horrible mistake. Before they could leave, a palace official arrived. He was an older gentleman in an impeccable suit, carrying himself with the authority of someone high-ranking. He spoke quietly with Commander Reynolds and Sergeant Clark, occasionally glancing at Sarah. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but their serious expressions told her everything she needed to know. This was a major incident. Officer Whitmore was being helped to his feet. Despite everything, he maintained his dignity, refusing to be carried on a stretcher. As he walked past Sarah, supported by 2 paramedics, their eyes met for just a moment. Sarah saw pain in his expression, but also something else. Confusion, perhaps, or maybe understanding that this wasn't a deliberate attack. She wanted to apologize again, but the words wouldn't come. Sergeant Clark gently touched Sarah's elbow, indicating it was time to go. As they walked toward the police car, Sarah became aware of all the cameras pointed at her. Tourists and onlookers filmed openly, some calling out questions. Why did you do it? Are you a protester? What's your name? The questions felt like accusations, each one another weight added to the crushing guilt she already felt. The ride to the police station was quiet. Sarah sat in the back of the patrol car, watching London pass by through the window. The beautiful city she had been so excited to explore now felt foreign and threatening. Every person on the street seemed to be staring at the police car, at her. She knew they couldn't actually see her through the tinted windows, but paranoia was setting in. At Charing Cross Police Station, Sarah was processed with efficient professionalism. Her fingerprints were taken, her photograph captured from multiple angles. She had to empty her pockets and remove her jewelry, which was placed in a clear plastic bag. The taser was bagged as evidence, handled carefully by officers wearing gloves. They also took her phone, her camera, and her passport. Sarah was placed in an interview room, a small space with plain walls, a table, and 3 chairs. The room smelled of cleaning products and stale coffee. A camera in the corner blinked with a small red light. She sat alone for what felt like forever, though the clock on the wall showed it had only been 20 minutes. Her mind raced with questions. Would she go to prison? Would she be deported? Would she have a criminal record? How would she explain this to her family, to her boss, to everyone back home? And what about Officer Whitmore? Was he seriously hurt? Would he recover completely? The uncertainty was agonizing. A different officer entered, carrying a folder and a recording device. She was a detective, she explained. Detective Inspector Sarah Okonkwo. The fact that they shared the same first name struck Sarah as oddly ironic. The detective sat down, set up the recording equipment, and explained that this interview was being recorded, and that Sarah had the right to legal representation. Sarah asked if she needed a lawyer. Detective Okonkwo explained that she wasn't under arrest yet, but that she had the right to have one present. They could provide a duty solicitor if she couldn't afford one. The word yet stood out to Sarah. Not under arrest yet. That meant they were considering it. The detective asked Sarah to explain everything from the beginning. Sarah took a deep breath and started talking. She explained about saving for the trip, about her excitement to visit London, about the morning at the hotel. She told them about her brother Marcus, about how protective he was, about how he must have put the taser in her bag without telling her. Detective Okonkwo listened intently, occasionally making notes. She asked specific questions about Marcus, about when Sarah had last checked that pocket of her backpack, about whether anyone else had access to her belongings. Some questions Sarah could answer easily. Others made her realize how weak her story might sound. The detective showed Sarah the taser now in an evidence bag. She asked if Sarah had ever used one before, if she knew how it worked, if she understood it was illegal in the United Kingdom. Sarah shook her head to all of these questions. She had never even seen a taser up close before today. She didn't know they were illegal here. She genuinely had no idea it was in her bag. Time passed slowly. More questions came. They wanted to know about her job, her criminal history — she had none, her social media posts, her political views. Sarah answered everything honestly, but she could feel her energy draining. The adrenaline that had kept her going was fading, replaced by exhaustion and overwhelming despair. After nearly 2 hours, Detective Okonkwo left the room to consult with her colleagues. Sarah was alone again with her thoughts. Through the small window in the door, she could see officers walking past, going about their day while her world was falling apart. She put her head down on the table, feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. When the detective returned, she wasn't alone. A man in a suit accompanied her, introducing himself as Chief Inspector Malcolm Bradford. He pulled out a chair and sat down, his expression unreadable. Sarah's heart sank. This was it. They were going to charge her with something serious. She could feel it in the heavy silence that filled the room before anyone spoke. Chief Inspector Bradford studied Sarah for a long moment before speaking. His presence filled the small interview room, commanding attention without saying a word. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and calm. which somehow made Sarah even more nervous than if he had been angry. He explained that they had reviewed the security footage from multiple cameras around Buckingham Palace. The videos showed clearly that Sarah had pulled the taser from her bag, that it had fallen, and that Officer Whitmore had been shocked. But the footage also showed her genuine shock and horror immediately after. It showed her distress, her attempts to apologize, her complete cooperation with authorities. Detective Okonkwo added that they had also contacted the Phoenix Police Department and spoken with someone who knew Marcus Martinez. The story about him being a security guard checked out. They had even managed to reach Marcus himself, who had confirmed with considerable distress that he had indeed placed the taser in Sarah's bag without her knowledge. Sarah felt a wave of mixed emotions. Relief that they believed her story, anger at Marcus for putting her in this situation, but mostly just exhaustion. She asked what would happen next. The question hung in the air as both officers exchanged glances. Chief Inspector Bradford explained that she was being charged with possession of a prohibited weapon and with assault. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Even though they believed her story, even though it was an accident, she was still being charged with crimes. Her vacation had turned into a criminal case. However, the chief inspector continued, there were some unusual circumstances emerging that might work in her favor. Officer Whitmore had been examined by doctors at St. Thomas Hospital. Physically, he was fine. The taser shock had been brief, and while painful, it had caused no lasting damage. More importantly, Officer Whitmore himself had given a statement. In his statement, Officer Whitmore had described what he witnessed from his position. He had seen Sarah pull the device from her bag with confusion on her face. He had seen her examine it as if she didn't know what it was. He had seen the genuine accident that followed. While he was not pressing for leniency, his statement supported the idea that this was not a deliberate attack. Additionally, the palace official who had arrived at the scene, a man named Sir Edmund Hartley, had taken an interest in the case. As someone with considerable influence, his perspective mattered. He had reviewed the evidence and agreed that this appeared to be an unfortunate accident, rather than a malicious act or security threat. Sarah was released on bail with strict conditions. She had to surrender her passport, report to the police station daily, and stay at a specific address in London. She was not allowed to go near any royal residences or any government buildings. The trial would be scheduled for 6 weeks later, giving her lawyer time to prepare her defense. The police arranged for Sarah to stay at a small bed and breakfast in Bloomsbury, run by a woman named Mrs. Agnes Thompson. Agnes was a widow in her 60s who sometimes provided accommodation for people in unusual circumstances. She asked few questions when Sarah arrived, simply showing her to a modest but clean room on the second floor. That first night was the longest of Sarah's life. She lay in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in her mind. She had called her parents from the police station, using the one phone call she was allowed. Her mother had cried. Her father had been silent, which somehow felt worse. They wanted to fly to London immediately, but Sarah had told them to wait until closer to the trial. The next morning, British newspapers carried the story. American tourist tasers Royal Guard, read one headline. Palace security breach, woman attacks guard, declared another. Some articles were more balanced, mentioning that it appeared to be an accident. Others were sensational, some even suggesting it might have been a planned attack or a protest. Social media was even worse. Sarah's face was everywhere. People who had been at the palace had posted their videos and photos. Some comments were sympathetic, but many were cruel. People called her stupid, careless, dangerous. Some suggested she should go to prison. Others made jokes. A few even sent her direct messages with threats. Sarah's employer, a small design firm in Phoenix, called her. They were understanding but concerned. The publicity was affecting their business. Some clients had expressed discomfort. Her boss suggested she take an indefinite leave of absence, unpaid, until the situation was resolved. Sarah agreed. What choice did she have? She spent her days walking around Bloomsbury, avoiding tourist areas where she might be recognized. She found comfort in small parks and quiet libraries. She read books trying to escape into other worlds, other people's stories that were far less complicated than her own. Mrs. Thompson was kind, often bringing her tea and homemade biscuits, never prying but always available if Sarah needed to talk. On the third day, something unexpected happened. Sarah received a letter. delivered by hand to the bed and breakfast. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy paper with an official-looking seal. Her hands shook as she opened it, fearing more bad news. But what she found inside was completely unexpected. The letter was from Sir Edmund Hartley, the palace official who had been at the scene. He wrote that he had been following the case closely and was disturbed by some of the media coverage and public reaction. He believed that Sarah was being treated unfairly by the court of public opinion. While he couldn't interfere with the legal process, he wanted to offer something else. Sir Edmund explained that he had connections with several legal firms and had taken the liberty of recommending a solicitor to handle her case. A woman named Victoria Chen, who specialized in unusual circumstances and had an excellent record with cases involving international defendants. He had already spoken with Ms. Chen, and she was willing to take the case pro bono, meaning Sarah wouldn't have to pay her fees. Sarah read the letter 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. Why would this important man help her? She was nobody. Just a tourist who had caused a major incident. But the letter seemed genuine, and when she called the phone number provided, she found herself speaking with Victoria Chen herself. Victoria was in her late 30s, professional and sharp. She wanted to meet with Sarah the next day to discuss the case. When they met at Victoria's office in a modern building near Liverpool Street, Sarah was impressed by the woman's confidence and intelligence. Victoria had already reviewed all the evidence, spoken with the police, and begun building a defense strategy. The solicitor explained that while the charges were serious, there were strong mitigating factors. The lack of intent, the confusion over the device, Marcus's confirmation that he had planted it without Sarah's knowledge, Officer Whitmore's statement, and the security footage all painted a picture of an unfortunate accident rather than criminal behavior. However, Victoria warned that the prosecution might push for a harsh sentence as an example. Tourist misbehavior and attacks on public servants were taken very seriously in the UK. They needed to show remorse, cooperation, and demonstrate that Sarah understood the gravity of what had happened, even if it was unintentional. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Victoria worked closely together. They prepared statements, reviewed evidence repeatedly, and practiced for testimony. Sarah learned about British law, about how the court system worked, about what she could expect during the trial. Victoria was patient and thorough, never making Sarah feel stupid for not knowing things. During this time, Sarah also started receiving messages of a different kind. Some people had dug deeper into the story and realized she was telling the truth about not knowing the taser was in her bag. A small movement of support began online, with people defending her against the harsh criticism. It wasn't enough to erase the negative attention, but it helped Sarah feel less alone. Mrs. Thompson became a source of comfort. The older woman shared stories about her own life, about difficulties she had faced and overcome. She reminded Sarah that mistakes, even terrible ones, didn't define a person's entire life. The kindness meant more to Sarah than Mrs. Thompson probably realized. As the trial date approached, Sarah's anxiety grew. She couldn't eat properly and had lost weight. Sleep came in short, restless bursts interrupted by nightmares of courtrooms and prison cells. Mrs. Thompson noticed and started making special meals, sitting with Sarah to ensure she ate at least something. One afternoon, about 2 weeks before the trial, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at the bed and breakfast. Victoria Chen had called ahead to say someone wanted to meet with Sarah, someone important who preferred to introduce himself in person. Sarah's curiosity mixed with apprehension as she waited in Mrs. Thompson's sitting room. The man who arrived was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, but he carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. He was in his 30s, tall and fit, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he introduced himself. It was Officer James Whitmore, the Royal Guard she had accidentally shocked. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. She immediately began apologizing, words tumbling out in a rush. She told him how sorry she was, how she never meant for any of this to happen, how she would do anything to take it back. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. Officer Whitmore raised his hand gently, asking her to stop. He sat down across from her and began to speak in a calm, measured voice. He explained that he had been thinking about the incident constantly since it happened. He had watched the security footage multiple times. He had read her statements. He had spoken with Sir Edmund Hartley and with his own superiors. What he saw was not a criminal or someone dangerous. He saw a young woman on vacation who had been put in an impossible situation by someone else's poor judgment. He saw genuine remorse and horror at what had happened. He saw someone whose life had been turned upside down by a complete accident. Officer Whitmore continued, explaining that he had a younger sister about Sarah's age. If his sister had been in a similar situation, traveling abroad and unknowingly carrying something dangerous, he would hope that people would show her compassion and understanding. He couldn't turn back time, and the legal process had to continue. But he wanted Sarah to know that he personally bore her no ill will. More than that, he had come to tell her that he would be providing additional testimony at her trial. He would tell the court that he believed this was an accident, that he had fully recovered with no lasting effects, and that he supported a lenient sentence. He couldn't guarantee what the judge would decide, but he wanted to do what he could to help. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. This man whom she had hurt was showing her kindness and grace she didn't feel she deserved. She thanked him repeatedly, her voice breaking with emotion. Officer Whitmore simply nodded, stood up, shook her hand formally, and wished her well. After he left, Sarah sat in stunned silence for a long time. Victoria Chen was thrilled when Sarah told her about the visit. This changed things significantly. Having the victim in a case speak favorably about the defendant was powerful. It wouldn't guarantee anything, but it strengthened their position considerably. Victoria immediately began revising their strategy to incorporate this new development. The days leading up to the trial were a blur. Sarah's parents arrived from Phoenix, having finally convinced her that she needed their support. Her mother hugged her for a full minute when they first saw each other, and even her normally stoic father had tears in his eyes. They stayed at a nearby hotel and spent every day with Sarah, accompanying her on walks and trying to keep her spirits up. Marcus called multiple times, apologizing profusely. He was racked with guilt, knowing that his attempt to protect his sister had instead caused her enormous trouble. Sarah was still angry with him, but she also knew he had meant well. She told him they would talk more after the trial was over, after she knew what her future would hold. Finally, the trial day arrived. Sarah woke up early after another sleepless night. She dressed carefully in the conservative outfit Victoria had recommended, a simple navy dress and cardigan, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back neatly. She wanted to look respectful and serious, to show the court that she understood the gravity of the situation. The courthouse was an imposing building with high ceilings and marble floors that echoed with every footstep. Media had gathered outside, cameras ready. Victoria had prepared Sarah for this, instructing her to walk with her head up but not to smile, to say nothing to the reporters, to simply enter the building with dignity. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Sarah had imagined but no less intimidating. Dark wood paneling covered the walls. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front, commanding attention. Rows of seats filled the gallery, many already occupied by journalists, curious onlookers, and court officials. Sarah's parents sat in the front row directly behind where she would sit. The prosecution barrister was a stern-looking woman named Charlotte Ashford, known for being tough but fair. She presented the facts of the case methodically, establishing that Sarah had been in possession of a prohibited weapon and that she had caused injury to a public servant. The words sounded harsh and damning, even though Sarah knew they were technically accurate. Victoria then presented the defense. She walked the court through the timeline, from Marcus placing the taser in the bag without Sarah's knowledge, through Sarah's journey to London, to the accident at the palace. She presented Marcus's sworn statement, the security footage analysis, and character references from Sarah's employer, friends, and even Mrs. Thompson. Officer Whitmore was called to testify. He entered in his full ceremonial uniform, and the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. He answered questions from both the prosecution and defense with clear, factual responses. When asked about his injuries, he stated they were minor and temporary. When asked about his opinion of whether the incident was intentional, he stated firmly that he believed it was a complete accident. The most powerful moment came when the judge asked Officer Whitmore directly if he believed Sarah deserved punishment. The courtroom was completely silent as he considered the question. Then he spoke clearly, his voice carrying throughout the room. He said that while he believed in accountability, he also believed in mercy. He stated that Sarah had already suffered considerably and that a harsh sentence would serve no purpose beyond revenge. Sir Edmund Hartley also provided a written statement that was read to the court. He echoed Officer Whitmore's sentiments and added that the incident had prompted a review of palace security procedures. In a strange way, Sarah's accident had helped identify gaps in their security screening that were now being addressed. This didn't excuse what happened, but it did provide some small positive outcome. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, her legs shook as she walked to the witness stand. Her mouth was dry and her hands trembled, but Victoria had prepared her well. She answered every question honestly, taking full responsibility for not checking her bag more carefully, while making clear she had no knowledge of the taser's presence. She apologized directly to Officer Whitmore, to the palace, to the United Kingdom for the disruption and concern her actions had caused. She explained that she had learned difficult lessons about awareness and responsibility. She talked about the impact this experience had on her life, not as an excuse, but to show that she understood the seriousness of what had happened. The prosecution made their closing arguments, emphasizing the seriousness of bringing prohibited weapons into the country and the potential danger to public servants. Charlotte Ashford reminded the court that ignorance of the law was not an excuse, and that Sarah had, regardless of intent, committed the crimes she was charged with. She recommended a sentence that included significant community service and a permanent ban from entering the UK. Victoria countered with a passionate defense. She acknowledged that mistakes had been made, but emphasized the complete lack of criminal intent. She highlighted the unusual circumstances, the victim's support, and the defendant's genuine remorse. She argued that Sarah had already paid a heavy price through public humiliation, loss of employment, and the stress of the legal process. She asked for leniency, suggesting a conditional discharge or minimal penalty. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Justice Margaret Pemberton, listened carefully to everything. She took notes throughout the trial, her expression giving nothing away. When both sides had finished, she announced that she would adjourn to consider the evidence and would deliver her verdict and sentencing the following day. The wait would be agonizing, but there was nothing to do but endure it. That night, Sarah barely slept again. She lay in bed at Mrs. Thompson's, staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Would she go to prison? Would she be deported immediately? Would she ever be able to return to normal life? The questions circled endlessly with no answers. Her mother came to her room in the early morning hours, hearing Sarah moving around. They sat together on the bed, her mother holding her hand like she had when Sarah was a child having nightmares. They didn't talk much, but the presence was comforting. Her father joined them eventually, and the three of them sat together as dawn broke over London. The return to court felt surreal. Sarah noticed details she had missed the day before: the intricate carvings on the wood paneling, the way light filtered through the tall windows, the smell of old books and furniture polish. Her senses seemed heightened by fear and anticipation. Every sound was louder, every moment stretched longer. Justice Pemberton entered and everyone rose. The formality of the court proceedings continued to intimidate Sarah, but she tried to focus on Victoria's earlier advice to breathe slowly and remain calm no matter what happened. The judge sat, arranged her papers, and looked directly at Sarah. The moment had arrived. Justice Pemberton began by summarizing the case, reviewing the evidence and testimony. She acknowledged the seriousness of the charges, but also noted the unusual circumstances. She spoke about the need for law and order, while also recognizing that justice required consideration of context and intent. Her words were measured and thoughtful, giving no hint of which way she was leaning. Then came the verdict. Sarah was found guilty of possession of a prohibited weapon. The words hit hard, even though they were expected. The assault charge, however, was reduced to a lesser offense given the accidental nature of the incident. Justice Pemberton explained her reasoning carefully, establishing the legal facts while acknowledging the human elements of the case. The courtroom was completely silent as the judge moved to sentencing. This was the moment that would determine Sarah's immediate future. Justice Pemberton looked at Sarah directly and began to speak. She stated that while the law had been broken, she was satisfied that there was no criminal intent or malicious purpose. She noted Officer Whitmore's testimony and Sir Edmund's support as significant factors. The sentence came, a 12-month conditional discharge, meaning Sarah would have no penalty as long as she committed no further crimes during that period. She would pay a fine of £500 for court costs. She would complete 100 hours of community service, which could be served in the United States given her circumstances. And she would be banned from entering the United Kingdom for 5 years, after which she could apply for the ban to be lifted. Sarah felt relief wash over her so strongly that her knees went weak. No prison. No permanent criminal record if she stayed out of trouble. Yes, there was a fine in community service, and the UK ban hurt her heart. But these were manageable consequences. She could rebuild her life. Tears streamed down her face as Victoria squeezed her hand in congratulations. The judge continued speaking, addressing Sarah directly now. She said that this case should serve as a reminder to all travelers about being aware of what they carry across borders. She hoped Sarah would use this experience to educate others and prevent similar incidents. She acknowledged that Sarah had already suffered considerably through public scrutiny, and that she believed Sarah had learned valuable lessons. After the sentencing, there was a brief moment of organized chaos. Victoria hugged Sarah, which was unusual for the normally reserved solicitor. Sarah's parents rushed forward from their seats, embracing their daughter tightly. Her father was openly crying now, something Sarah had seen maybe twice in her entire life. Her mother kept repeating "thank God" over and over. The media outside the courthouse was waiting, cameras ready. Victoria had prepared a brief statement that Sarah would read. Then they would leave quickly without taking questions. Sarah's hands shook as she held the paper, but her voice was steady when she spoke. She thanked the court for its fairness, apologized again to Officer Whitmore and the people of the United Kingdom, and expressed her commitment to learning from this experience. As they hurried to the waiting car, reporters shouted questions. Sarah kept her eyes forward, following Victoria's earlier instructions. Some questions were hostile, others sympathetic, but Sarah answered none of them. Within minutes, they were safely in the vehicle, pulling away from the courthouse. Sarah exhaled deeply, feeling like she could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. The next few days were spent handling practical matters. Sarah's passport was returned to her. She had to meet with a probation officer who explained the terms of her conditional discharge in detail. She had to arrange payment of the fine, which her parents insisted on covering despite her protests. She had to book flights home, a task that felt both exciting and bittersweet. Before leaving London, Sarah wanted to do something important. She wrote a letter to Officer Whitmore, thanking him for his kindness and his testimony. She explained that she would spend her life being more careful, more aware, more responsible because of this experience. She told him she would never forget his compassion, and that she hoped he had a wonderful career serving the Crown. She also wrote to Sir Edmund Hartley, thanking him for his unexpected support and for recommending Victoria. She wrote to Mrs. Thompson, who had become like a grandmother to her during these difficult weeks. The older woman hugged her goodbye at the bed and breakfast, making Sarah promise to write occasionally and let her know how life went. Victoria Chen met with Sarah one final time to go over paperwork and ensure everything was in order. The solicitor seemed genuinely pleased with the outcome, and told Sarah she had handled everything with dignity and grace. She gave Sarah her contact information and said that if Sarah ever needed a reference or support in the future, she should not hesitate to reach out. The flight home to Phoenix felt strange. Sarah sat between her parents, holding her mother's hand during takeoff. As London disappeared below the clouds, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief to be going home, sadness that her dream vacation had become a nightmare, gratitude for the people who had helped her, and a strange sense that this experience, horrible as it was, had taught her things she needed to learn. When they landed in Phoenix, Sarah's brother Marcus was waiting at the airport. The moment he saw her, he started crying and apologizing. Sarah hugged him tightly, telling him they would talk everything through but that she forgave him. He had made a terrible mistake, but she knew his heart had been in the right place. They would both learn from this and move forward together. The story had reached Phoenix, of course. Sarah's friends had seen the news coverage. Her former employer had received calls from reporters. Some of her neighbors had recognized her in the photos circulating online, but she was surprised to find that many people were supportive. They understood what had happened and felt sympathy rather than judgment. Sarah started her community service at a local women's shelter, helping with administrative work and organizing donations. The work was meaningful, and she found herself connecting with women who had faced their own difficult circumstances. She began to see her experience in a broader context, understanding that everyone made mistakes and that redemption was possible. Slowly, Sarah began rebuilding her life. She found a new job at a different design firm, one whose owner appreciated her honesty about what had happened. She started seeing a therapist to process the trauma of the experience. She became more active in her community, volunteering even beyond her required hours. She gave talks at schools about international travel safety and being aware of what you carry. The online attention gradually faded. New stories replaced hers in the news cycle. People moved on to other scandals and incidents. Sarah was grateful for the return to anonymity, though she knew that a Google search of her name would always bring up the incident. She had to learn to live with that permanent digital footprint. What surprised Sarah most? 5 years passed more quickly than Sarah expected. She completed her community service within the first year, far exceeding the required hours because she found the work fulfilling. Her conditional discharge ended without incident, meaning she had no criminal record. She had stayed out of trouble, rebuilt her career, and created a life she was proud of. During those 5 years, Sarah maintained correspondence with several people from her London experience. Mrs. Thompson sent cards at Christmas and on Sarah's birthday. Victoria Chen occasionally emailed to check in, sharing updates about her own life and career. Most surprisingly, Officer James Whitmore sent a message once a year, brief but kind, acknowledging the anniversary of the incident and wishing Sarah well. Sarah had also become something of an advocate for travel safety. She had created a website and social media presence dedicated to educating travelers about international laws, customs regulations, and the importance of knowing exactly what was in their luggage. Her story, once a source of shame, had become a teaching tool. She spoke at travel conferences and wrote articles for tourism publications. Her relationship with Marcus had fully healed. The incident had actually brought them closer in some ways. Marcus had quit his security job and gone back to school to become a teacher, partly inspired by wanting to educate people rather than just protect them. He credited Sarah's grace in forgiving him with giving him the courage to make that change. As the 5-year mark approached, Sarah faced a decision. Her ban from the United Kingdom would soon be eligible for review. She could apply to have it lifted, which would allow her to return to the country. The question was whether she wanted to. The thought of going back to London brought up complicated feelings. Sarah discussed it with her therapist, with her parents, and with close friends. Some thought she should let it go and focus on moving forward. Others believed that returning to London and facing those memories might provide closure. Sarah herself wasn't sure. Part of her wanted to prove she could go back and have a positive experience. Another part was afraid of the painful memories it might resurrect. After weeks of consideration, Sarah decided to apply for the ban to be lifted. Not because she necessarily planned to return immediately, but because she wanted the freedom to choose. She wanted to know that she could go back if she decided to. Victoria Chen helped her with the application process, writing a strong letter of support. Officer Whitmore, when asked, also provided a letter recommending the ban be lifted. The application process took several months. During that time, Sarah continued her normal life, but found herself thinking more and more about London. She remembered not just the incident, but the beauty of the city she had glimpsed before everything went wrong. The architecture, the history, the parks she had walked through during those difficult weeks. There was unfinished business there. When the approval finally came, Sarah felt an unexpected surge of emotion. She could return to the United Kingdom. The ban that had been imposed during the darkest period of her life had been lifted. She was free. She sat in her apartment, holding the official letter, and cried tears of relief and release. Sarah decided she would return to London, but she would do it right this time. She planned carefully, booking a trip for 6 months later. This time she packed minimally and checked every pocket, every compartment of her bags multiple times. She informed the UK border authorities in advance of her arrival, wanting complete transparency. She was taking no chances. She also reached out to the people who had helped her. Mrs. Thompson was thrilled to hear Sarah was returning and insisted she stay at the bed and breakfast. Victoria Chen said she would love to meet for dinner. Most nervously, Sarah contacted Officer Whitmore asking if he would be comfortable meeting for coffee. To her relief, he agreed. The flight to London felt completely different from her first journey 5 years earlier. That young woman full of naive excitement seemed like a different person. Sarah was older now, marked by experience, but also stronger and wiser. She watched the English countryside appear below the plane with a mix of apprehension and anticipation. Going through customs at Heathrow Airport made her heart race. She handed over her passport, watching the officer scan it. She saw him pause, reading something on his screen. He looked up at her, then back at the screen, then at her again. Sarah's stomach dropped. But then he simply stamped her passport, welcomed her to the United Kingdom, and waved her through. Just like any other tourist, Mrs. Thompson was waiting at the bed and breakfast with tea and the same warm smile Sarah remembered. The older woman had aged a bit, more gray in her hair, but her kindness was unchanged. They spent hours talking, catching up on 5 years of life. Mrs. Thompson showed Sarah photos of her grandchildren and shared news about other guests who had stayed over the years. The next day, Sarah met Victoria Chen at a restaurant in Covent Garden. The solicitor looked much the same, perhaps a bit more gray at the temples. They talked about their careers, about changes in their lives, about how strange it was to be sitting together under such different circumstances. Victoria admitted she had thought about Sarah's case often over the years, that it had reminded her why she became a lawyer in the first place. Meeting Officer Whitmore was the most emotional encounter. They met at a small cafe near Westminster. He arrived in civilian clothes, looking relaxed and friendly. They shook hands awkwardly at first, then sat down with their coffees. There was so much to say and somehow nothing to say at the same time. Officer Whitmore had left the Royal Guard 2 years earlier and was now working as a security consultant, training others in threat assessment and de-escalation.
He had married and had a young daughter.
He told Sarah that the incident had actually changed his career trajectory in positive ways, leading him to think more deeply about security protocols and human behavior. Sarah apologized again, even though she had apologized many times before. Officer Whitmore told her it was time to stop apologizing. What happened had happened. They had both moved on. In fact, he said, he sometimes thought about how one random moment had connected their lives in this strange way. He bore her no ill will and never had. He hoped she could finally forgive herself. Those words meant more to Sarah than she could express. She realized she had been carrying guilt for 5 years. Even after completing her sentence, even after rebuilding her life, hearing him tell her directly that it was okay to let it go felt like permission she hadn't known she needed. She felt something heavy lift from her chest. During her week in London, Sarah did all the things she had planned to do on that first trip. She visited the British Museum and walked through centuries of human history. She saw a play in the West End. She took a boat ride on the Thames. She ate fish and chips in a proper pub. She wandered through Hyde Park, feeding the ducks and watching children play. On her last full day, Sarah did something she had been building up to all week. She returned to Buckingham Palace. She stood behind the barriers with other tourists, watching the changing of the guard ceremony. Her heart pounded and her palms were sweaty. Memories of that terrible day 5 years ago flooded back vividly. But something else happened too. She watched the ceremony complete without incident. She saw the precision and dedication of the guards. She observed happy tourists taking photos and children laughing. She realized that life had continued here, that the palace still stood, that her mistake had not broken anything permanently. The world had moved on, and so could she. Standing there, Sarah felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. She had returned to the scene of her worst moment and survived it. More than survived it. She had processed it, learned from it, and integrated it into her life story rather than letting it define her completely. She wasn't just the woman who tasered a royal guard. She was Sarah Martinez, a woman who had made a terrible mistake, faced consequences, and worked hard to become better. As she walked away from the palace, Sarah pulled out her phone and took a selfie with the Golden Gates in the background. She posted it to her travel safety website with a caption, "5 years ago I made a mistake here that changed my life. Today I returned not to erase the past, but to prove that we can grow from our worst moments. Check your bags, know the laws, travel safely, but also know that mistakes don't have to be the end of your story." The post went viral. Thousands of people responded with their own stories of mistakes and redemption. Former critics apologized for their harsh judgments. Travel agencies asked to use her story in safety campaigns. News outlets wanted interviews. Sarah did a few, carefully and thoughtfully, always emphasizing personal responsibility and the importance of second chances. On her flight back to Phoenix, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. One moment of carelessness had spiraled into an international incident, but it had also connected her with kind people, taught her resilience, and given her a purpose she might never have found otherwise. She wouldn't choose to go through it again, but she also couldn't deny how it had shaped her. She thought about Officer Whitmore with his baby daughter, about Victoria Chen continuing to help people through legal difficulties, about Mrs. Thompson opening her home to strangers who needed kindness. She thought about her own growth, about the community service,